pleasure and honor to be joined today with Dr. T. Colin Campbell, who has been showcasing and sharing science and research around the world that people can change their lives and their health through plants and vegetables. And there's so much research that you've been part of that's been very profound, but I'd love to start at your roots of how you grew up on a dairy farm and was the first in your family to go to university. And I believe you started studying veterinarian science. Was medicine and medical research ever in your trajectory as a young boy?
No, it wasn't.
Or young man?
Not to my knowledge at that time. I later discovered when I was working in history that my great uncle or great grand, we're not really sure yet, but for sure, the one that was my father was named after. It turns out he was a doctor in England. My father's an immigrant from Northern Ireland, and that man, it's an interesting story. He wrote about 14 books, and he actually became a vegetarian when he was 41. Spent the rest of his life doing the same thing I'm doing, and I had no idea he even existed. And I discovered that by accident working in the Oxford Library in University of Oxford.
How long ago was that?
It was
when
1985, 86.
So during the same time that you were doing the research for the China study?
I was on that track doing that research because just prior to that, I had been very active in some major organizations in this country, doing I was on the National Academy of Panel in 1980-82. And we came out with a report suggesting that we should probably eat more vegetables and fruits. It was a kind of distinguished panel. In fact, it was the most sought after report in the history of the National Academy of Sciences at the time. And I became, to some extent, sort of the face of it, because I was giving testimony before congressional committees like the Senate and House. And I was on the Neil Lair show, and I was quite out there. And so some folks got annoyed at me, and they wanted to throw me out of the university and get me to be disbarred from my society.
And this was while you were at Cornell University?
Yeah, it wasn't just Cornell in that case. In that case, it was actually people on the outside. I had a fairly senior position at the big society in the country of medical doctors. And I was the congressional liaison. It was about 80,000 physicians, I think, and others. And I was the congressional liaison for that group. That was 1978 and 79.
What were you addressing in Congress?
Well, I was testifying before committees about the report that we did in 1980-82, came out in 82. And that was on diet and cancer. And there was only 13 of us on the committee, and I was the only nutritional biochemist. And so I started saying things that questioned, the way we do things. And that upset some of my colleagues in the profession. That's part of the story. And I became, then I went to Oxford in 1985. At that time, the pushback was pretty intense, really nasty. And I was just curious, where's all this nastiness coming from? So I decided to kind of look into the history of two areas, one nutrition, the other is cancer. Look at the origin of those two sciences. And I found something amazing, and I didn't publish that at the time. I wrote quite a long paper, and then I used it. I've used it in more recent years. I dug it up and got it out. And so I've written a book now that draws from that.
And through your research while you were in England, you stumbled upon the connection to your great uncle?
Yes.
Who was also on the same track?
Yeah.
Wow.
I thought it was really eerie because I thought there was nothing before our committee in 1982. I thought we were the first. Everybody else thought so too. But when I started getting into history, first I found a book in 1937 by a guy who turned out to be the founder of the American Cancer Study, of all people, in 1913. And he was suggesting that, with this new society, they should give some serious attention to nutrition. 3 years later, he was off the board. It kind of kicked him out. And then there were others who, from time to time, would make some comment like this, and they were just totally denigrated, ignored, maybe abused. And so, the more I got into the history, I kept going back. Somebody in 1922, and then it was in 1915, and then 1908, and then kept on going back to back. In 1888, I was amazed, that there seemed to be people talking about this kind of thing, and then forgotten. I mean, it's very distinguished people at the time, like professors at the University of Edinburgh and so forth. And then back to 1865, I got that far back, I said, this is crazy. And he's the guy who wrote the physiology texts at that time that medical students were using in Great Britain. And then he referred to somebody in 1846, I think it was that. I said, wow, I read that book. I got the book out of the library, dusted it off, found out this man had written 14 books through his career. He was really quite distinguished, and he had actually been elected to the Irish Academy of Science. And then I said, who is this guy? I couldn't figure out who he is, because he was talking something along these lines that I'm now talking about. And I remembered, I looked at his name. His name was George McIlwain.
McIlwain?
McIlwain.
Oh, McIlwain.
And he was from Northern Ireland. Well, my father's an immigrant from Northern Ireland. And when I read this guy's book in 18, I thought, wow. I said, I started to say to myself, gosh darn, this is my book. This is what I wrote this darn book. I was feeling it like, there's something strange here. And so I always had remembered that we took my father back to Ireland just before he passed away in 1970. He used to tell me I should have told my grandmother she was killed in a car crash just before I was born. Her name was McIlwain. And I said, wait a minute.
So all of a sudden,
it
the
turns out
pieces are connecting together.
it was her father. Or you see, we haven't found a gravestone yet, but we've got a lot of other evidence. It was either him or his brother, but in any case, there was a McIlwain. My father's name is Thomas Colin Campbell, so he was named after his mother. And so this guy turns out to be my ancestor. And he wrote that in the 1800s.
It's pretty remarkable.
It was remarkable.
Like plant-based is really in your blood.
I went home and I told my mom at the time, she was still living, my dad had passed away at that time, when I did this in 1985. I said, I had to tell her about it. She said, this man's name is George McIlwain. I said to her, she said, don't you remember your father always talking about Uncle George? He was calling him Uncle George, but we have some evidence he was my great-grandfather.
Wow.
But he was kind of elderly when he had my grandmother. And that wasn't exactly the Victorian way to live for all kinds of reasons.
And now you're looking back at the research that he was doing.
Well, he planted a seed at that time. There were two theories of cancer. One was called the constitutional nature of disease. That means cancer is probably coming from our whole body existence and stuff like that, things like food, environment, and so forth. And it wasn't caused by a single thing, which was a popular idea. That was the alternative idea, the local theory of disease. So we had the constitutional disease, local theory, and he was arguing for the constitutional disease, which is nutrition, that sort of stuff. And the other was that. Well, then it turned out that was middle 1800s. And he referred to somebody in the 1700s that he used to think a great deal of. His father before him was also a surgeon. And it turned out to be a spectacular story because the one who he was referring to who started this idea was in the late 1700s. He's very famous, but not for that. He's famous for he founded a hospital, it's one of the big hospitals in London now. He talked about this, and so eventually my ancestor, he wrote a book called The Memoirs of John Abernethy in 1850-some. And he was recalling where he learned this from. I'm reading this, I said, this is what my research is showing me. And all of a sudden it got me on the track of then understanding how the medical system is what it is. It got me understanding how we went down the track. We took, in the late 1800s, as a society, or in the medical area, we chose the wrong hypothesis. And then we developed a whole medical system around the wrong hypothesis.
So what is the wrong
Well, the
hypothesis
one,
that then turned into
yeah,
modern medicine and medical care?
that hypothesis was called local theory of disease. What they meant by that was, if you get cancer, for example, the surgeons believed that it was caused by something very specific, and it could be taken care of easily. Just cut it out. That's the local theory. The alternative is the whole body. There's something else going on here, or so forth and so on. So the medical system got founded in the late 1800s, and they chose the local theory of disease. That turns into be a concept I call reductionism. And that's what I wrote the book. I wrote the China study, and then I wrote the second book called Whole that came out in 2013. I didn't know at that time. Well, I knew some of that, but anyhow, my ideas about nutrition and how powerful it is radically different from almost everyone else, especially in the professions. Obviously, people like Ron Weiss and some other physicians have now begun to embrace it too, but this whole idea is very powerful. We can do more with nutrition than all the pills and procedures combined. We can treat disease with it. We can reverse diseases.
When we're talking about, nutrition, you're saying that we can reverse disease. It's not just about the preventative measures.
That's
but
right.
We can really heal
Exactly.
somebody.
Exactly. And that's a very major point, because I think the future of this idea is not going to be dependent on arguing that we can prevent disease, because a lot of people don't necessarily pay attention to that. But when you can say we can treat disease, somebody who already has a disease, switch their diet and then watch the results. That's fantastic. And so that's what I'm writing about now, is the underlying science, because I did a lot of research. I mean, experimental research. I had lots of students, doctoral students and postdoctoral students, and sometimes visiting professors, and they would work with me, and we published a lot of stuff, and it was actual original research. And without knowing this, I was coming to that point of view just from the research. And now all of a sudden it comes together like that. It's just amazing.
What do you feel is the sort of future of plant-based? Is it now, bringing the physicians are now slowly starting to embrace the science and the research?
To some extent, individuals are, but that's another question. And why don't doctors know this? Well, the answer is pretty obvious. There's not a single medical school in the United States that teaches nutrition, not one. I just got to it not intentionally. I mean, it was exactly the opposite of what I thought too. Being raised on a farm, milking cows, and that right there is a little bit vestige of my milking days. But I was totally farm, first in the family, go to college and all that sort of stuff. And I was really into animal protein. That's really important, supposedly. And I did my doctoral dissertation on trying to show how to produce animal protein more effectively. That's where I came from, exactly the opposite. And what got me to start changing was after I left graduate school, and I spent some years, 3 years at MIT, and then I went to Virginia Tech in the Blacksburg, and that was in biochemistry. Well, there I had a fantastic opportunity. They wanted me to be the coordinator of a program in the Philippines of feeding malnourished children. So that's what I did in addition to my teaching. And in the Philippines, I was setting up a laboratory to analyze for carcinogens that might cause cancer. And on the one hand, on the other hand, I'm working, trying to help develop this program for feeding malnourished and starving children, and making sure they got enough protein.
And at that time, you were looking at, animal proteins were
that was everything.
Hopefully,
of course, that was everything. And I got this impression of some of the children and their families is not that carcinogen that supposedly causes the cancer. It's not the cause. It's the nutrition. It's the protein. And so then I came home and I got a grant from the National Institutes of Health that lasted for 27 years at one grant. They kept renewing it because I was getting this fantastic results that were hard to believe. On the one hand, from a scientific point of view, it was well accepted. But when I started talking about it in the public limelight, which I did when I was congressional liaison and stuff like that, I started saying, wait a minute here, we can't say the things we're saying. That's when they wanted to, it came about some wanted to throw me out of my university. That's another whole story in itself, because I had tenure, and I told them, go scratch themselves. So,
So would you say you're a bit of a rebel?
yeah, I was, and that's become a story in and of itself again. There's actually I guess I can say there's this. I want to emphasize, it's already been signed and the script is almost written, but there's a movie being made of my life right now by people that you would know. Everybody know this. They're Oscar winners, and so it's a whole new dimension that I'm involved in right now. That because what I'm talking about is a way of thinking about health, a way of thinking about medicine, a way of thinking about research that has been forgotten. We ignored it. Now we have, in my view, we have a medical system that's rotten to the core. And we don't teach nutrition for starters. And so now we have the highest healthcare costs of any country in the world by far, per capita. We have environmental problems, that the chief cause of the environment is the food we eat. And it all comes down to one thing: we eat animals. It's just pretty simple. And, that's where I came from, so I know about eating animals.
When we're speaking about, conflict, how did the conflict at home work when you started speaking to your family?
Well, my father had passed by that time. I mean, he sort of knew I was getting into it, but he didn't. He had always been a farmer. He only had a couple of years of education himself, but he was gone. But my mother didn't take too kindly to it. But my brothers and our own family, we had 5 children, and that we will all worked it out. There's now 5 children, spouses, grandchildren. We got 11 grandchildren. I attribute all of that to my wife. We've been married 57 years, and so her mother had died when she was 51 of colon cancer, and that was a very tragic story then. And I didn't know at that time, what I know now, except the fact that medicine had failed her. The doctors had failed her, and then failed my dad too, because he had eventually had a heart attack. He died in 72 or 70. And so we kind of in our family, I mean, kind of seeing this kind of stuff like that.
Oh, thanks.
I was going to say we had to quit because you were there cold.
It was warm over there in the sun, and now it's getting...
So the story had a lot of personal content to it. My wife, she started listening because she had lost her mother. And we had little children at the time. And
How many?
I said we had 5 children.
Oh, okay, fine.
We had 4 boys and a girl. In any case, they're pretty much involved in this sort of stuff too. One of us now a doctor carried on my research at University of Rochester Medical Center.
When speaking about cancer and looking at cancer-causing factors, how much does nutrition and diet play into it versus environmental toxins of,
Right.
I'm not going to put my food in plastic Tupperware, right. But they're still putting their meat in the plastic Tupperware. So,
well, that's a good precaution. Not because those chemicals cause cancer. They do experimentally if you test them along. And that's usually the argument made, all these chemicals, environmental chemicals cause cancer. They're not the cause of cancer. In fact, we have almost no evidence that these environmental chemicals are related to human cancer. That was part of my story, because I started out with a chemical, and we can produce cancer with that chemical, but the cancer would only grow if we gave protein at a high level.
I grew up in California, which has a very strong legislature about trying to label and warn people about what's a cause, cancer-causing toxins. And I really grew up thinking that it was environmental things and different types of chemicals. I never heard that food could really be the impetus for it.
Yeah, well, I didn't know that either. So, but it
So
is.
how did your
It's a
research
nutrition.
begin that's unveiled this?
Well, let me clarify a couple of words here because sometimes I get confused. There's food, and then a diet is the more or less the array of foods that we tend to eat on a regular basis. So that's the word diet. It's a bunch of foods. Nutrition is the biological expression of the food. So nutrition is a concept that deals with the science. After we consume nutrients, for example, they're digested, they're massaged, they're metabolized, all that sort of thing. That's nutrition. So, and I just want to make that distinction because it does translate into the kind of foods we should eat as plant-based. But to explain it or to understand it, one has to understand the nutrition. That's the science part of it.
What are some of the leading causes or that you have found in your research? I believe
So,
like the casein protein in dairy.
well, the chief cause, and I'm confident of this by this time, the chief cause is our decision, our mental decision to eat animals. I never thought I would say that because I was on the other side of the fence. But yeah, somehow it's that concept that animals are here for us to eat, okay? And that was in ancient times almost. Eventually, when protein was discovered in 1839, they said, was this discovered meat? Oh, that's why we should eat animals. So animal-based protein became the thing to get. That's what makes a good diet, good health. And the protein it really is at the center of the debate. And what I learned in my own research and then going back in history, we chose to eat the animals. That in turn, we discovered that it had protein in it. Even the word protein. The protein comes from the Greek word, means proteos, which means of prime importance.
Of prime importance.
Yeah, so when it was discovered, the first nutrient, more or less, that was discovered, the scientists in that time, medical people in 1839, that period, they said, wow, this is the greatest thing ever. Now we know what it is, and here's sort of the chemical structure and so forth and so on. That took on a life of its own that to this day people think is important, that it's so important. We need protein.
So when we're thinking of prime importance, an animal-based protein has always been deemed like high quality.
That's right, exactly.
And so I'm wondering, like, as myself, as a plant-based vegan and others like me, are we missing out on something because we're getting ours from plants?
No, you're not. We can get all the protein we need. In fact, the ideal amount of protein we get from plants. We don't need to add animal to get protein. That's crazy.
And do they have different types of amino acids?
Yes, they do. And we're not sure exactly how that works, but I have a pretty good idea. When we make the choice of eating animal food, and then given the fact that total food consumption their total calorie consumption like a zero-sum game, when we start eating more animal food, we eat less plant food. Okay, that's why I say it's mental. It's in the choice. It's the choice, unconsciously, subconsciously. But we decide to eat animal foods, and then we put more and more in our diet. That way, we're decreasing the foods that really matter.
I guess
so it's a combiner.
I can only be so full. So if I start filling up.
That's right, exactly. And then you decrease the consumption of plant foods. So this whole nutritional idea has been misconstrued in that sense that you see diets high in animal protein, and they're associated very powerfully with heart disease, cancer, and all the rest. When you see that, it's not only because of the animal protein itself, in a biochemical sense. Mm-hmm. It's a combination of that plus all the things that are missing. Antioxidants, dietary fiber, and all that sort of stuff. So when we start looking at it that way, and we also start looking at the idea of how nutrients work together, it becomes that's the way I looked at it, and it's just extraordinarily powerful. And so when I wrote the China study, I was trying to get into some of that kind of thinking. And at that time, we were told the China study wouldn't succeed and so forth and so on. But I finally got to the end of the book, and I said, and it says near the back, forget everything I said, essentially. There's too much science here for some people. Forget what I said, just try it. It is really quite an interesting story. And I was pretty confident, it was good, of course, and because we had been doing it by that time. That wasn't the issue, but to say that in a book to be responsible and stuff like that. I didn't want to say, oh, here's all the explanation. Here's exactly how. I didn't want to say that. I want to be a little bit cautious. I said, well, just try it. In the beginning, the publisher, they tried to get me to change, and I wouldn't change. And finally, a little publisher took the book and said, okay, if you can sell 3,000 or 5,000 books, or something like that, well, he'll be happy. Later, he changed it a little bit. He said, if you can sell 13,000 books, we'll make it. Well, we've now sold 3 million.
Yeah, I was going to say.
We made the whole company and everything.
You've now sold millions of copies.
Yeah. We now hold the world record in the number of foreign translations. We've had the book translated to 48 languages.
Wow. Is it, when you say world record, is this
for health or health type books? Yeah.
That's what I was going to say. Is the China study is a very dense scientific book, and then you have millions of copies sold. It's pretty profound, because I don't think any other medical research book would connect with an average reader, not just
that's right, exactly,
not just in the medical industry or science industry.
That was my argument, actually, at a point in time when I was visiting with publishers, because they said, this book is not going to sell. You need to bring it down to a 10th grade 10-year-old, that level of reading, number one. Number two, get all those references out of it. We have about 750 references. People don't care about it. Get the references out. And the third is at least half the book should be recipes. And I had to tell them, I said, I don't even know where the pots and pans in the kitchen are. Why would I put recipes in there? And then they wanted to take out all the references, and I said, that's who I am. That's my game. I want to tell a story. So when we published,
and have it be based in truth.
Yeah, I was basing my argument not for personal reasons or ethical reasons or anything. I was just interested in the data, and that's what I saw.
And it's so incredible that you never started out on a plant-based trajectory or agenda whatsoever.
That was as farthest from my mind as
yeah.
That wasn't it.
Dr. Campbell and I were speaking, and I'm so happy to have Dr. Weiss join us, because we are here at Ethos Health and Organic Farm, which is a really interesting dynamic of where you're bringing the patients to the plants that can heal them. And it sounds to me that a lot of your work was inspired by Dr. T. Colin Campbell.
It was, yeah. I remember I began my journey, and a lot of the times we watch patients when they're introduced, or people, even who are not sick, they're introduced to the idea of eating plants, but then you watch them, they usually don't adopt it immediately. Sometimes they adopt it 3 years later, 5 years later, 10 years later. It can be a long journey. My journey started like about 15 years before the China study with my father's sickness. He had cancer. I saw what plants did for him. And then when the China study came out, I sat up reading that night after night. It took me about 3 or 4 nights. I'd work during the day, and I'd stay up until 3 o'clock in the morning reading that and dog-earing the pages. And when I closed the book, I decided I had to completely change the way I was seeing patients. And it was this concept that Dr. Campbell talks about, emphasizes in the book, about the holistic approach to health, and how you don't get health from just taking a pill, or it's not defined by a molecule. It's defined by complex interactions and in the world around us, in the natural world within us, in the body, biochemically, and then that connects to all the forces that surround us. And because I was, at that time, and for most of my life, always hell-bent on getting a farm, it inspired me to then put what I knew about a doctor into the farm, and then put them together and connect human health to the farm format. And it was because of it really gelled with me after reading that book, the way this comprehensive idea about health
and nutrition
supported, human health.
it's really interesting to have both of you together because you're representing, the biochemistry and the research. And then Dr. Weiss, you're representing putting it into action as you're a primary care physician.
Yes.
And you're seeing patients here like I would go see my normal doctor, except for your approach isn't to immediately get out your prescription pad and write out a prescription. Is that correct?
That is correct.
How do you actually put the science into motion and into action?
We have a regular, like a full service regular, I don't think it's regular, but a primary care practice. And we take any human being from a day old or before they're born to, 100 years plus. And we pride ourselves on being able to take people who are not sick and prevent their chronic diseases. And then if they are sick, reverse them and get them off their medications. Through the China study, a lot of diseases, almost all chronic diseases are preventable and most of them reversible. So most of the people who come to find me, they don't find me by accident. They already know I'm a little crazy. So they know why they're coming here. So they're actually not geared towards wanting medications. But once in a while, if there's somebody who needs something, I will have to write a prescription, but it's rare.
I see.
I think for the first time, I wrote a prescription for a statin agent, probably in 3 years.
That's awesome.
For Lipitor.
I mean,
because
that's great that this isn't common practice here at Ethos Health.
Yeah.
And along those lines, I just heard a recent talk that you had with Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, and you were really addressing chemotherapy, and that if we could prescribe a whole food plant-based diet to patients, a lot of them would see positive results versus opting for chemotherapy when treating cancer.
Yeah, that story comes in bits and pieces. We still got to put some of it to knit it together in a sense. Heart disease, as we know, and our colleagues have done this, reverse heart disease is pretty much of an easy deal. Diabetes also. Cancer has been regarded as I say, an inexorable kind of disease. Once this starts, it's going to keep on going. You might alter it here and there. And so, and that's such a rigid belief that we never, in research, have really done any serious work. Not very little. Of actually taking cancer patients and then try to treat them with this disease. My youngest son, Tom, he's now got a study underway on metastatic breast cancer in women. And he's been underway now for about 6 months or so. It's not completely as it should be because he had to do it very officially. He's at a medical center. So he had to get IRB approval, 6 IRB approvals. Wow. It was, the hurdles he had to go through was incredible. But the
just to feed people.
I'm sorry?
Just to feed people plants.
Yeah, and so, that's right. And so he's now got it underway, but he couldn't do the whole thing the way I had wanted him to do it. And that is to say, they wouldn't allow patients to just try the diet alone without the chemotherapy. They wouldn't allow that. Because we already know the chemotherapies, it can do all these wonderful things. Why would you want to do that? That kind of, so they blocked him from having that arm of the research study. But what they did allow him to do is to take women who had metastatic breast cancer, it's returned, and then let them continue on their regimen, but just put them on a plant-based diet. So it's a limited study right now, but he's just getting his toe in the water, because if he gets the results that are good, then he can go to NIH, and that's where I did a lot of my stuff. Then he can get substantial funding to really, then he'll have the data to say, look here, and they can't really turn him down. And then he could do the full thing. But the reason all that happened is because all these years, I've been in the cancer community and nutrition too, there's no way that the oncologist would ever give even a hint that diet could work. Don't bring us crazy ideas to us, that kind of thing.
Even to this day, when we have cancer, a lot of cancer patients come to us because, because of my father's story, that he had the stage 4 cancer, and because they're desperate, because chemotherapy is not working, and they're trying alternative anything to help them. And
chemotherapy is not enjoyable whatsoever.
No, and it can kill you. Or it can cause permanent dysfunction in you, which makes the rest of your life, whatever you have left, unenjoyable. So the number one thing, the history that we get from patients when they go to the conventional oncologist, and it doesn't matter even if it's at the most ivory tower academic center, because I think it's a natural thing for a patient who has cancer always to say, doctor, what should I, because there's some inclination, well, maybe I should eat better, and they ask the oncologist, what should I eat? And the standard answer is, it doesn't matter. Just whatever it doesn't matter, whatever you want. Or, you know what? Why don't you see our dietitian? Because we have a cancer center, the dietitian will tell them to eat lean meats, non-fat dairy products, low-fat dairy products, and eat more vegetables. That's the standard. And on top of that, and avoid soybeans.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, if you have breast cancer.
How does a person navigate this world of misinformation regarding nutrition and food and health?
That's what I try to tell them in this new book I have, was exactly that question. Why is nutrition so confusing for the public at large and amongst professionals too? And why isn't it not taught in medical schools? Why has it just been written off, as if it didn't matter? Yeah, and I think that story is, I find it very exciting. We chose the wrong path. We could have gone this way or that way. We picked the wrong one.
Is there hope that we can curve it around?
Yes, of course. Starting with something like what we've done. These kind of efforts where you can bring some professions together and reasonable people. You got to start with people who are willing to, converse and be civil about it. And a lot of them aren't. But we'll have to keep plugging away. I think, I'm biased in this case, but being in science, but I really think that the word nutrition is not understood. That's part of the problem. A lot of people aren't deciding what nutrition is based on the science because a lot of people don't even look at the science. But they do pick up little pieces and then argue about it. So the whole mess is I think we get the science properly defined, nutrition properly defined, especially with some of the authorities.
So if thinking just about nutrition, are we able to find nutrition through supplements then? Or do we need to go to a whole food and really eat it in its true form?
Whole food.
And why is that? If science has then developed ways where we can extract and what seems to optimize nutrients?
We got some, in my talk today, we got some really excellent studies now, very convincing, where the so-called responsible nutrient in the food that might be associated with less cancer, less heart disease, they took it out and put it in a pill. Mm-hmm. When you do it that way, it doesn't work. When it works in the food in one form, it does not work when it's in isolated form. That's where the concept of whole comes from. Everything is having to work together. You can't take one thing out and expect to get the same effects as you do in food.
Seems like nature just got it right.
Nature got it right. That's exactly right.
What I like to tell patients, because a lot of patients come in on supplements, and I think it's so attractive because the promise of health from just taking this little pill is so attractive.
That's right.
It's easy to do. You can just feel better, just pop something in your mouth. That's why, pills are popular. They don't take a lot of effort. But what I tell the patients is that a supplement is actually a drug. What is a drug from a pharmaceutical company? It's a copy of a molecule that's reproduced millions of times over and over again, and it's targeted to a specific biochemical reaction into a cell to interfere with it. Well, when you take, vitamin C or some other supplement molecule, you're taking a large amount. Or even if it's a plant molecule, let's say resveratrol, you're taking this copy over and over and over again, and you're introducing it into the system, which will then most likely interfere in an unexpected way with a biochemical reaction, which will then cause an unexpected chain of events from all of the other myriad chemical reactions that are hooked up to the one you just cut.
When we're talking about extracting and interjecting these molecules back into our bodies in a different way,
that really makes me think of oils, like olive oil, or now coconut oil has become such a huge craze. And they've been touted with, good popular diets like the Mediterranean diet and things like that. But then I hear information that we need to eat the whole food and fruit versus going to processed oil. What are your thoughts on that? And is that just another example of how we've extracted a molecule and are trying to reintroduce it into our body, and it's not whole form for it to interact correctly?
Basically, I think in the simplistic form, the oils that we need to worry about are the added oil, yes, but it's the oil that, in fact, in large measure, is the so-called omega-6s,
Omega-6.
like corn oil and stuff like that. And
Soybean oil.
yeah, and the so-called omega-6 is a pro-inflammatory fatty acid. The omega-3, which is the counter, is an anti-inflammatory. And so it's the ratio of the two.
Keeping
the body
balance.
uses the ratio very nicely because it needs some omega-6 when it's wanting to fight off something or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But the ratio matters, and the ratio, generally a good ratio for with a good diet is like 2 to 1, 3 to 1 maybe, of 6 to 3, somewhere in that territory. We're now at an average in this country of like 15 to 1 to 20 to 1. It's awful. So we're consuming a diet you can describe as a pro-inflammatory diet.
And those omega-6s that Dr. Campbell is talking about are preferentially found in atherosclerotic plaques. It's the most common kind
That I
of
didn't
fat
know.
that's found in an atherosclerotic plaque. And recent experiments have shown that when LDL, the bad cholesterol, gets damaged and very reactive, it's triggered. That damage is triggered by the omega-6, by the linoleic acid. It starts off its very activated and reactive process, which then, causes atherosclerosis. And all of that comes from all the oils you see that are flooding the American, palate. The safflower oil, the soybean oil, the, sunflower oil, all these oils that end up in our food.
So it's not good to have the added, so-called added oil, in isolation. That's why we say, no oil.
The coconut oil, I know there's this craze about it now, but that's particularly toxic for another reason. It's because it is extremely high in saturated fats.
And that's why when you look at it on a shelf, it's dense, just the same as
Yes.
animal fat is dense.
Worse, that if you take an ounce of coconut oil, it has more saturated fat than an ounce of lard. You're better off eating the lard.
I've got a slightly different version on that that we're going to have to get ourselves updated on.
Okay.
The saturated fat is not very chemically reactive.
Yeah.
And it got blamed for a lot of the problems over the years, like high cholesterol level, for example, when it should have been the animal protein that got blamed. That was learned over 100 years ago.
Oh.
So the saturated fat has turned out to be the surrogate excuse, for not paying attention to the animal protein. That's something new. We'll talk about that.
But saturated fat,
It's associated with heart disease, but it doesn't necessarily cause.
yes, but we now know that it does. It is most likely the cause of diabetes. In that it is toxic to islet cells. It kills them.
Yeah,
Saturated fat is toxic to them, and it interferes with the action of insulin and its ability to get sugar into the cells. So in that way, it's not good for the development of diabetes. I hear what you're saying about the elevation of cholesterol.
In heart.
And
Yeah, but there,
it's a cancer
but there,
too.
yeah,
It's good
but-
for cells.
well, because it may increase eating that fat, the saturated fat may increase IGF-1 levels.
Yeah,
Right.
I don't know that. And,
Where's the
I think
sport
so.
cards
I
right
buy
now?
what
I
you
think so we'll have to look up that.
say. This has to be a different place.
Well, I really enjoyed your time today, and I just want to end with something fun, which would be, I've spoken with Dr. Michael Greger, and his favorite plant to eat are legumes, and I'm wondering, what are your favorite plants and vegetables or fruits to eat?
I'd like to say I don't have a favorite because it's a whole mixture. want to keep my options open. So lots of greens, lots of legumes, lots of whole grains and so forth. I don't know. I don't know whether you have a favorite or not, but I like broccoli.
I like being on the farm here. I generally like all things. For some reason, well, I know what the reason is. I hate Brussels sprouts. I'm like the George W. Bush of Brussels sprouts. I have to tell you that. But other than that, and I know how good they are for you, but I still don't like them. Other than that, I like everything. But at certain particular seasons, there are certain choices that I like which become extraordinary. Like at this time of year, when frosts come, to kale, which withstands cold weather like this and actually becomes a superstar. After working through the whole summer, the kale takes off after the frost. The frosts encourage the plant to start manufacturing more natural sugars, like as an antifreeze, so the plants can live through these colds. And then you taste these sugars, the kale becomes very sweet. And so I love kale at this time of year, all the kales. And Osaka red mustard greens.
Mustard greens.
Osaka red.
Oh, I like that too.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah.
I'm getting hungry.
From a distance, it's like, what do you eat? Well, just fruits and vegetables, that's all. It's like so simple. It's like fruits and you're just eating fruits and vegetables. But then when you actually try to break it down, and we're so detached from what a plant-based diet is traditionally, that nobody even knows where to begin.